Greetings, everyone. I am so excited and honored today to be in conversation with Barbara Hand Clow and to talk about her book, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, which she originally published in 2004 and is now coming out in a revised version with her husband, Jerry Clow, bringing in meditations in the book. But it's an extraordinary book, Barbara, and I'm so glad to be in this conversation with you about it. But let me just briefly introduce you and then we'll dive in. Barbara Hand Clow is an internationally acclaimed astrologer, ceremonial teacher, author, and Mayan calendar researcher. She's written many books, including The Pleiadian Agenda, Awakening the Planetary Mind, which I highly recommend people read, the Mayan Code, and her fictional trilogy, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, Revelations of the Aquarian Age, and Revelations from Source. And we'll talk later in the interview about why that trilogy is important also in terms of the nine dimensions. But I have such respect for you, Barbara, and feel such a deep heart connection with you. And I'm so grateful to be in this conversation today.
Well, thank you. And I felt such a heart connection with you the first time you interviewed me a couple of years ago. And we're definitely really out of the same initiatic school. We've had so many past lives together. And it's just so wonderful when you find one of those people on the planet, because we all have those people. But there's a lot of people on this planet, and they're kind of hard to find. That's why we pursue our own interests, because we find people that way.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, as we explore alchemy of the nine dimensions, let's start with talking about how this came to you in the first place, because that in and of itself is an amazing story.
Yeah. I in 1994, I received a series of visions, and I described them in the opening chapter of the book, a light transmission. And when it was happening, my head felt like it was a computer, and I was being downloaded. And the vision that I saw, I now know of an icosahedron. And I didn't even know what an icosahedron was at the time, but I found one. So this is the icosahedron quartz that I use now, for the last 10, 15 years as I work with this material. But in the vision, lines of light came into each one of the points of the icosahedron that was suspended in front of me. And as far as I can tell from trying to check clock time, I was in an altered state for about 2 or 3 hours, judging by when I came out of it. And then what was that? Because the information that came in was extremely scientific: quantum mechanics, new physics, string theory, galactic astronomy. And I knew a lot about astronomy, but I just didn't understand like more than 40 or 50% of the book. And so then, for a period of 15, 20 years, Jerry and I went out and taught the book. And while I was teaching the book, now, okay, so how did I get the book? Well, then, I'm sorry, I conducted a series of channel sessions where I invited people to come to the channeling sessions who had the ability to ask questions about the material that came in that I didn't even understand.
Mm.
And so that's how I got the wide, as you know, there's a very wide reception here of complex material. And so then after that was all done, it was made into a book. I had the sessions transcribed and I organized them. And then Jerry and I went out and taught activations of Alchemy of Nine Dimensions for about 20 years. And that's why Jerry is so close apart. He didn't write a lot of this book, but he taught it with me all these years, and he understands it from a body point of view because I tend to be in my head a lot. So that's how it came in. And then after about 10 years of teaching, chapter by chapter, dimension by dimension, material that used to disagree with conventional science was being proven by scientists out there in the world. And fortunately, thank the goddess, I collected all that material. So by the time I got up to 2003, 2004, I had the scientific background for all of these wild things that the Pleiadians were saying. So what the book does is the book says this is what the Pleiadians said, and this is what science says. So that all the chapters are in two parts, where they're bringing in this double level. And I think it's the only scientific analysis of a Pleiadian or of a channel book that has ever been done.
I think that's accurate, and it's brilliant to see the interweaving of what you got with those downloads and then the science, but also how so much of what you presented in the book was ahead of our scientific understanding. And it's
Yeah.
now, science is now catching up with it.
Yeah, so see, that gave me, of course, great, as I saw that unfolding, it gave me a great deal of trust in the material. But now I'm in an absolutely divine place because at this point, now that I've really finished this body of material now, only with this revision, with especially Mayan calendar information. Now I'm reading my own book like a young college student who goes to her first biology class, doesn't know anything about biology, and just simply realizes when they hand her the textbook, you have to study this and master it. And so now I'm working on mastering my own book because I do think this is a valuable data bank, very valuable.
Well, and something you and I were talking about before, Barbara, is it feels like it is so critical that this book and this information come out in this time. As
Yeah.
you and I talk about a lot, this is such a critical transition time on the planet. And we used to be able to open and function in these nine dimensions in our past as humanity, but we've lost connection with that. But now that we're in this time of transition, it's critical that we open that back up again.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that's true because there are so many other teachers at this point who are really developing, in some cases, aspects of my book, and deepening them. And then in other cases, people are coming in with even higher dimensions, which is really exciting to me. I mean, we're really in the middle of a blowout at this point. And in chapter 9, where I dealt with time acceleration and Dr. Carl Kalaman's work, I realized that basically all of this explosion of dimensional comprehension really exploded in 2011, 2012. And that the reason that date is important, that area of time is important, is that that period represents the time acceleration that the Mayans basically pointed out a couple of thousand years ago. I mean, how could they have known this when you start to really reflect on this? And so I think that the other thing that's happening, and this was more speculative on my part, but I can just feel that it's happening, is that we have gotten far enough now so that our planet is not quarantined anymore. And I think that may be one of the most important messages in this book, because basically we have been such a traumatized and violent species for 15 or 20,000 years, which is something you and I really share an understanding of. We both are really into doing therapy on all the complexes that people have from this period. But I really think that we've gotten far enough in our healing since the end of the Mayan calendar so that the cosmos is now opening to us. And it's really exciting and it's really, really difficult. The reason all of us are having trouble with sleeping and we're having trouble with aches and pains and discomfort is that as the cosmos opens up, comets are coming in, huge solar flares are painting our Earth with some of the most magnificent colors that I've ever seen in my life. And so this is very hard on us. There's no question this degree of acceleration is really hard. And I mentioned to you a book that I really like that has just come out. It's called The Realized Light of 12 Dimensions by a writer from Canada named Joshua Reichman. And I think Joshua has gone beyond what I've done in this book, Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, where he's really starting to penetrate the intensity of the feelings that are happening as the cosmos is opening. And it's really pushing our buttons because most of the resistance against the energy coming in of the light coming in is from the religions based on Abraham, which of
Mm.
course is Islam and Judaism and Christianity. And so the three major religions from Abraham are really, really at this point seemingly in a state of collapse. I mean, I don't know what to think about it exactly. I just watch it. And by the way, I am looking into that more because my trilogy, that which you mentioned earlier, I wrote a trilogy to show characters experiencing nine dimensions of consciousness and showed them opening to these levels so that the reader who and if you like the characters, it's pretty easy to just go right with them and have a good time. But the basic background material, the content of that trilogy is priestly sexual abuse. So in that trilogy, I really went after the downfall of the Catholic Church because I think in whatever religion someone is coming from, we have to expose the truth about some of the abuses in these religions. So I'm just beginning to see, Heather, how all those things are tying together. You know, with as a writer, you just write, and then you go a couple of years later, oh my God, I see why I did that. You know?
Absolutely. And some of what's so tragic is as we were in the age of Pisces, it was, and the roots of these religions were about trying to reclaim our mystical understanding and come back into connection with Source. But instead, these religions became institutionalized and got pulled into the patriarchal paradigm and became about power and control instead of supporting us and opening up to the higher
Yeah.
dimensional awareness that we're capable of. But another thing that you've mentioned in the book, and you touched on a minute ago that I think is so important, is you mentioned that we need to clear our trauma individually and collectively in order to fully open to these higher dimensions. And I think that's such an important point that that's part of, I think, the intensity that people are feeling in this time as we go through the photon belt, as you talk about, as we're getting these cosmic energies coming in. It's pushing to the surface those
Mhm.
blocks, those traumas
Mhm.
that need to clear to
Yeah.
support us in opening more fully.
Yeah, that's right. And then the analysis of the fourth dimension, of course, in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions is so critical because basically what the organized religions did, and by the way, the Eastern religions have their own issues, but there's no question that the West is needing to clear more collective trauma than the East, as far as we can see. In fact, sometimes I could feel people in China or India or Tibet or whatever watching this drama unfolding, particularly in the Middle East, and going, how long is it going to take them to wake up? Because in many ways, Eastern religions, I was tempted for years to become a Buddhist. You probably were too, because it's a very enlightening religion. But I felt that I needed to work on the collective trauma from my own background. I felt that very, very strongly, which is a Catholic background combined with Native American background. It was an interesting journey, but a lot of people carry that journey. So as we clear the collective trauma and start to expose the truth about what's been hidden and what's been used for power and abuse, what happens is the light can penetrate deeper. So that light keeps penetrating our consciousness, and then we see more. And we realize, oh, I have to process more of this. And so I
Mm.
think we're going to see this kind of exposure in Judaism. We're going to see it in Islam. It has to come so that people can see the truth.
And so that we can clear those blocks and
Yeah. And for
open up.
people to really see clearly what happens when we give our power away. And so another great teaching in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions is that the sixth dimension is the larger format for how these terrible struggles are working out. Anytime you can move your mind to a six-dimensional perspective and see things much more from the point of view of darkness and light and this side and that side, the more you can do that, the more you can start to free yourself. And so in the sixth dimension, what goes on in that dimension scientifically, and this has been proven by very famous physicist Julian Barber, what's going on in the sixth dimension is a geometrical world. In his case, he uses triangles because that's a fairly simple geometry. Like if you took his material and you used it to explain an icosahedron, it would take you 1 million pages. So he uses triangles, and of course, that's good because we're used to pyramids. We're all used to the beauty of how much triangles can reveal to us. But in Triangle Land, which is what Julian Barber calls the sixth dimension, he's not with us anymore. So I can't verify that with him. I wrote to him. He died just after I wrote to him, and I've never been able to connect with him. But in Triangle Line Land, each one of us has one vote, and we can exercise that vote. And I give techniques, meditation techniques for exercising that vote, because we've got to take the power back. There's no question these people are going to get as much power as they can get. They've certainly amply shown that they're never going to stop. I mean, Elon Musk is trying to figure out a way to get to Europa, as far as I can tell, and maybe buy it and then build a castle. These people are not going to stop unless something stops them. And we're the ones who have to stop.
We have to really reclaim our sovereignty.
Yeah.
But before we go further, Barbara, let me pull up the image so that people get a sense of the nine dimensions that we're
Mhm.
talking about here.
This drawing shows how the dimensions develop from the iron core crystal, the first dimension, at the bottom of the image. And what happens with the iron core crystal is the iron core crystal in the center of our planet is vibrating in synchronicity with all of the centers of all of the other bodies in the universe, galaxies, planets, stars, whatever. And so the iron core crystal has all the information that the universe holds. And each center of each one of these other bodies in the universe also has a first dimension that has this data bank, which is interesting. So then the second dimension on the Earth is the realm between the iron core crystal and the crust at the surface, which is called the telluric realm. And the second dimension is where the organic process of working with the information in the first dimension develops. And that's all very, obviously, very complex. And then we emerge in the third dimension, which is linear space and time. So here we are sitting together doing a Zoom in linear space and time. And the reason it's important to really imprint the power of the second dimension is that second dimension is what actually gives us life. And it's actually, if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, we can actually trace this development of life, which I did with some of Kalaman's material. But in the third dimension, because that's the source of life, we can figure out how to stay alive and healthy. And the global elite and the pharmaceutical companies are doing everything they can to keep us from realizing how much access, natural access we have to our health. Then we move to the fourth dimension, which is non-physical, but very emotional. So the fourth dimension, which is the archetypal realm, which is the collective consciousness of the people on the planet, the fourth dimension is very palpable because it's so emotional. And so the more you process and deal with your emotional issues, and the more you become a master of the feelings within yourself that you have because of the type of biology that you carry, because of your astrological chart, because of your childhood upbringing, your current milieu, whatever that is. And so as you open and process your feelings, your heart starts to open. And we move into the fifth dimension, where what happens is unity consciousness starts to come in, and we start to have an open heart, and we start to have an entirely different relationship with life on this planet. And once we get to that fifth dimension, And by the way, Heather, I could have just stopped and not written about any more dimensions because in a lot of the Eastern traditions, they just simply teach people how to be in heart consciousness. And you want to know what? It's enough. But we're
Mm.
complicated Westerners. We are for some reason. I was one of Matthew Fox's students, and one of the things he always taught us was that we should honor the religious tradition that we were born in because it's the one that we brought in order to give a gift on this planet. So I've followed that. So if we go into the sixth dimension, what happens is we start to the heart, what happens in the activations, by the way, right there in that center, right there in that middle there between 5D and 6D, right on that, you can move your little pointer over there, right on the vertical axis, right. What happens right there is, boy, is that a critical point in an activation because people have heart attacks when their heart's open. And we especially see that during midlife crisis. The
Interesting.
midlife crisis is a period where there's a fairly good risk of heart problems. So in the activations, what we used to do, and any by the way, I'm bringing these activations up because all of the information on how to teach it yourself is right on my website. Anybody can do this. You just have to do a few basic things. But at this point in the activation, that's when I open the geometrical field. Because as long as the geometrical field that a person is working with expands sufficiently, your heart will not incur any damage or any stress. So
Mm.
we go into the sixth dimension, and the sixth dimension is just a delight. I guess it's my favorite dimension. I could talk about it all day, but we've got to move along here. And so what we discover is we start to get a sense at this point on this diagram of energy coming down through this dynamic instead of going up like that because sound in the seventh dimension creates the geometry in the sixth dimension. And in almost every, in fact, I shouldn't say in every sacred tradition on this planet, there's a recognition that that sound is being created by geometry. For example, in Christianity, we talk about the word of God coming in, the sound of God, the music of the spheres of the cosmos. And then as we move in the seventh dimension on galactic information highways of light, very complex. Seventh chapter in this book is actually really interesting in terms of contemporary physics. And I just wish more physicists would read this book because I think they could instantly go a lot faster than they are. But what can I say? So what happens is the divine mind, the ideas of God, the consciousness of God is existing in the eighth dimension. And it exists in the eighth dimension as pure white light. And so that's why in many, many spiritual traditions, when people encounter the light, they're almost blinded by it because it's so intense. And the reason it's so intense is we're still headed here up to the ninth dimension, to the galactic center. And in our system, our planet, from Earth to the galactic center, that's the first through nine dimensions. And the reason this book has nine dimensions and not more is because the Pleiadians said back in 1995, when the material came in, they said that human beings up to this point only had the ability to comprehend nine dimensions. So I said, okay, I'll stick with that. Well, boy, the ninth dimension, you want complication. This is evolution, and this is the evolution of time. And this is time functioning as waves in the universe. And then, if you want to keep rolling, I took a few stabs at it, but Joshua got a lot further. Then we go to the 10th dimension to our twin galaxy, the Andromeda galaxy. So that's the basic dimensional setup. And believe it or not, anybody can access this information.
It's just so brilliant the way that you have laid this out with the help of the Pleiadians. And part of what struck me as I was moving through the book and working with this, you talk about the third dimensional reality as where physical and non-physical, or physical and metaphysical reality interact.
Mhm.
And it feels like many of us maybe came to the earth plane because at that dimension, it's such an accelerated place for transformation.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that you talk about that I think is so critical is that in the age of Aries, we got cut off from our connection with the earth, which meant we were disconnected from this first and second dimensional reality,
Yeah.
and how crucial that is for our grounding, our health, our reconnecting with our sacred embodiment to then open up to these other upper realms.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so it's a very good point. And I mentioned a few things about Eastern religions. And in my lifetime, and your lifetime too, during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, all kinds of gurus and teachers were coming to the West and teaching Western people about the higher dimensions. And so, in a lot of our workshops, we would work with people from Eastern traditions who attended. One workshop was attended almost 100% by a group of Sikhs that I taught in Santa Fe in 1996. And faced with around 100 people with multicolored turbans on their heads sitting on the floor in front of me, I said, "Why are you here?" And they said, "We're here because we understand the higher dimensions, but you understand the lower dimensions. So we've come to learn from you." So then I said at that point, "Okay, I'll teach you about the lower dimensions if you'll teach me about the higher dimensions." And that was kind of a thread working through this. And I expect to see out there in the world as spiritual traditions keep on developing, I think we're going to see more of a melding of these lower and higher dimensions. The reason I'm mentioning this, Heather, is the reason I really believe in this teaching is that in some of the Eastern traditions, with various forms of yoga and meditation, people can have a lot of energy difficulty. And the reason they're having energy difficulty is really simple. They haven't yet opened the first two dimensions.
Ah,
So
wow.
that's why we
Wow.
work so hard to ground them. And that's where Jerry's so wonderful. Like in our activations, we always had one healer for every 10 students, which really got to be a lot of fun with maybe 30 healers, 300 people. It was magnificent to watch that flow. But boy, we start with grounding. And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention another beautiful thing about this book is that Jerry and I, in order to teach it, we figured the only way we're going to really be able to teach this is with music. And was there some way, could we find a musician or could we find a way to create nine-dimensional music? And at that point, Michael Stearns, one of the greatest classical composers on this planet, he's behind the music behind Battlestar Galactica and a lot of really, really amazing movies. Michael showed up as a client for Jerry in his office, and I handed him the Pleiadian Agenda, and I said, "Would you please check this?" And a few weeks later, he said, "You write like I make music."
Mm.
So Michael composed the nine-dimensional music for us, and it was very expensive. We only just finally paid it off a few years ago, but it's free in the book. The Inner Traditions has this great, Barron Company has this great system where you can access the music by going, and it tells the book, of course, tells you how to do it. I don't even know how to do it. This is so exciting to me because this is how the younger generation learns. And so Jerry's meditations, tape meditations, are accessible for free, and so is Michael Stearns' music. So there's another whole dimension to this opening up at this point.
Oh, that's so beautiful because then, and Jerry's meditations are so beautiful too in the book. He's really done such a beautiful job with that. But it provides then a way that people can open to those frequencies. It's not coming through the mind, it's coming through the experience of it, which again, I think supports us in opening our hearts
Yeah,
to then be able to access these
yeah.
higher.
And then Jerry, my husband for 50 years, we had our 50th anniversary this year, has a beautiful voice. And so, and he could have been a radio commentator. And so, fortunately, the meditations are just beautiful because it's him reading them. Really nice. So you
Perfect.
can get it too if you can figure. I can't figure out how to do any of this stuff,
I'll figure it out.
but those kids figure it out.
Barbara, coming back to the fourth dimension for a minute, because that's so, and you write brilliantly about it in the book that that's so where a lot of us are getting caught in turmoil on
Yeah.
the planet right now. One of the things that you talk about that I've never heard formulated quite this way before that I thought was so helpful is you talk about the difference between duality and polarity. Can you talk some about that? Because I think that's such a way to cut through some of the conflict that we all are getting caught in
Yeah,
that
and of course, then I also
dimension.
give a polarity wheel. So I give you a tool, fourth dimensional tool, so you can accelerate on this with every single conflict that we're dealing with right now. And there's a lot of them. And for many of us, the Middle East is the most intense one because it involves the three religions of Abraham. It's obvious why it's so intense. And so, what you have to do, and the book gives techniques for this, you've got to move out of this side is right and that side is wrong. My hope, of course, is that this type of thing is going to change the dynamic, but how? Each one of us has one vote. And so every day I do a meditation on the Middle East to see whether I'm getting dualized because I'm getting mad at what's going on, or whether I'm polarizing it and continuing to hold an understanding of all of the players in the drama.
And part of what's so powerful about that difference that you described between duality and polarity, and then the wheel of 12, which so fits with astrology,
No,
you're really,
it is based on astrology, certainly.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're really describing, which is so intrinsic in our understanding of the astrological chart, that when you have two things in opposition, you need to hold the both and come to center
Yeah.
so that you're holding the wholeness rather than getting caught in the conflict, which would be duality. And
hmm
I think that is such a powerful way of helping people through some of those blocks that we can get caught in and mired in fourth dimensional reality.
Yeah, and as you know, when we read as astrologers, whenever we're dealing with a particular sign, we're also dealing with the opposite sign. And the two signs like Aries, Libra, Taurus, Scorpio, the way to understand Scorpio or Taurus is to understand the polarity between with Taurus and Scorpio, as you know. And the best astrological readers help people with the difficult parts of their chart by helping him see both sides of the coin, so to speak.
And from my perspective, with my work on the precessional cycle, when you look at each age in the precessional cycle, as the first half is energizing that age, like the age of Aries,
Mhm.
then the second half is meant to be pulling in the energy of the sign opposite. And I think
Mhm.
part of where we've gotten out of balance as humanity is we haven't done that integration as we've gone through the ages. So then we end up out of balance.
Mhm. I agree with you. And then you pointed out to me a year ago or so about how Jeffrey Green, is that his name, the Pluto book? Yeah, how he has done such a great job working with that issue of the opposite sides and precession.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
sub-ages.
yeah.
Let's jump to the seventh dimension now and its connection with the crop circles,
hmm
which that's a whole fascinating part of the book and your incredible connection with the crop circle makers.
Yeah. And as I said in the book, I just finished the end of chapter 9 where because the crop circles books are chapters 10 and 11. I mentioned that I wrote those two chapters first. So I wrote chapter 10 and 11 first, and I forgot about that till I read that part this morning. But the circle makers are really the ones who really opened me up to way to how the dimensions feel in a visceral sense. And the reason that happened was I was one of the early crop circle researchers and did some research at conferences in England and mostly England. And finally got to the point, there I was, Jerry and I were busy teaching activations. And I said to myself, well, maybe I should just start playing with these circle makers and see if I can figure out a way to understand their mentality. So I created an experiment, and a bunch of the major crop circle researchers were there, so that it was verified. And what I did with a group of students was I took some images that I felt the crop circle people could could imitate, or they could create a crop circle like it. And some of the crop circles are so complicated that I picked a fairly simple image of cock. What are they called? Cock something. It's a physics term, but they're can't remember right now. But I created a couple of images and put them on cards, and I had students hold the image in front of their face, and then I had them press the image to their third eye, and I had them visualize the image. And I said, let's see whether the circle makers pick up on this and want to play with it. And over the next 3 days, 3 verified crop circles came in that were a rendition of the image that I put out. So then at that point, I knew that I could communicate with them. So then another wonderful phase started in my life with John Michel, who's no longer with us, one of my favorite esoteric researchers. But John and I had a whole lot of fun figuring out ways to communicate with circle makers. And he, of course, is a master artist who draws sacred geometry. So it's John Michel who really opened me to understanding sacred geometry because he's just one of the masters on the planet.
But it's so incredible that interaction that you had with the crop circle makers, but
Oh,
also your incredible description of how they were trying to wake us up
yeah.
through those powerful messages and energies in the crop
And you
circle.
know what? They succeeded. I having gone through the whole crop circle research phase, I watched people opening up to sacred geometry, and especially the younger generation, where who the hell knew what sacred geometry was back in 1980, right? But I just watched every year 10,000 people, 50,000, 100,000. At this point, millions of people have awakened sacred geometry in their brains by studying those images and going to visit the crop circles.
And from my perspective, from a neuropsychological perspective, it's showing that as we are in this process of increasing our consciousness, we're also reweaving the connections between the left and right hemispheres of the brain
That's right.
and reconnecting that wholeness of our capacity to integrate sacred geometry, integrate things visually with the
Hmm.
right brain attunement.
And so you're walking right into the Blue Brain Project.
Yes.
So when it came time to do the 20th anniversary edition, I'm so grateful to Bear and Company for supporting that because the other publisher let go of it. And the edition that they have created is just magnificent. I'm so grateful for that. Besides providing free dimensional music and meditations. So what was I just going to say? I lost my train of thought. We
The
were
blue brain
Oh,
research.
yeah, right. Okay. So what I decided to do in the introduction was add anything that I had that the second edition of Alchemy was 2011. So this is actually the third edition. So I decided to look at anything after 2012 that might give us more information. Well, I got a lot more than information. I got two profound verifications of Alchemy of Nine Dimensions that take this book from hypothesis to theory. This is now a theoretical book, and this is extremely important. And physicists, would somebody out there please realize they need to read this? Oh, God, scientists are just drive me crazy. But back to the Blue Brain Project, a group of researchers in Switzerland developed just an enormous computer that they wanted to use in order to see whether they could see signs of dimensionality in the human brain. Really interesting situation. I first heard about it in 2015, and I kept every single scrap of paper I could get on it because it immediately went underground. Because, yeah, oh yeah, it's very hard to get any information on this. Because who do you think is using this information?
Mm.
Artificial intelligence. See, here we
Mm,
go again. Could be another steal of something that belongs to all of us.
mm.
Okay, so these computer experts and scientists were topologists. Topology is a form of mathematics that creates formulas to show how curved surfaces and parabolas and circles and all that, how they manifest geometrically. It's a very, very complex science. And luckily, I knew a topologist when I was young who fell in love with me and told me all about what he was doing so that it's a very, very arcane science. And I described it as well as I could. That's chapter 5. But what's important is these scientists have have provided via computer images of all 9 dimensions and even into the 10th and 11th dimension. Now, I expected it to go into the 10th and 11th dimension because I am absolutely certain that superstring theory is the correct theory for dimensionality on this planet. And again, why don't the physicists take advantage of the power of superstring theory? Well, you could say the topologists are doing it. So what this has enabled me to see, been able to see some of the images. I've been able to actually see geometrical images of each one of the dimensions.
Wow.
Awesome. So the reason this is important, it proves that our brains operate according to 9 to 11 or 12 dimensions of consciousness. They proved it. Now, they don't go out and say it because if they did, they would lose their grants, but they proved it. So, in the introduction, I described the Blue Brain Project, much as I did here today. And then the other thing that I went after was the books that are coming from Transylvania about a major archaeological discovery there. And readers, what I did with that, Heather, is it's so complicated. This involves 7 complicated books. So what I did in the introduction is I distilled down the point of this material down to around 5 pages. And if listeners really want to find out what this material really is, it's easy. Just get a copy of Transylvania Sunrise, because that's the first book of the 7. Each one develops everything more, but you could get the scope of what's going on here with that first book, Transylvanian Sunrise. And the author is Radu Cinemar, and the co-author is Peter Moon, who's also the publisher. So in my book, I give a distillation or a summary of all 7 books. And the reason this is important is that in Romania, archaeologists have found tunnels and projection rooms under the Carpathian Mountains that date back to 50,000 years ago, number one. Much more significantly, these tunnels, one goes to Tibet. There's also tunnels leaving Transylvania. One goes to Tibet. One goes to the Giza Plateau. Another tunnel goes into the Middle Earth. And then apparently something else is going on with Iraq because the same technology was discovered under Iraq and a projection room and tunnels. You remember weapons of mass destruction? And
Mm.
remember how everybody got snookered into attacking Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction? The Americans were trying to get in there to get into that complex. Well, I don't know whether they ever did get in there. They probably destroyed it before they had a chance. But the Americans did get into the tunnels under Romania because what happened politically on this planet, this is such incredibly important information. What happened politically was the Romanians have the place. It's their country, right? So the Americans can't get in there to study the technology that's going on down there without coming to an agreement with the Romanians, right? So you ever wonder why suddenly Romania got admitted to the what is it called? The big organization,
NATO?
NATO. You said
Yeah,
it. Yeah,
NATO.
yeah. So the Romanians were admitted into NATO, and the American researchers went in and worked with the Romanians. So what's significant about that is two things. First of all, the Americans discovered pretty quickly that you can't work with this technology without changing your consciousness.
Yes.
Basically, the Americans discovered from the Romanians that you cannot activate this technology. Now, what is this technology? Okay, now this is 50,000 years old. And what's down there is a time machine. And if somebody has the mentality and the consciousness to work with that machine, they can time travel all over the universe back to the beginning of the time. So the other books are covering more of those issues and what did they discover and what was going on under Egypt and all the much more details. But what I'm saying to you, Heather, is that in the last 15 years of our lives, an archaeological site has been discovered that's not only 50,000 years old, but researchers have activated it and they have learned how to use that technology. Now, you tell me, should that be a secret?
Well, and what you're saying that's so important also is that it couldn't be activated without these psychics
Mhm.
who were able to operate at these higher dimensional realities to interface with this and access these holographic memories in this time
And
machine.
and the psychics taught some of the American researchers how to activate their consciousness to a higher level. And then also Peter Moon, the reason Peter Moon is involved in this is he's the author of the Montauk Project. And viewers may remember the Philadelphia experiment and stuff like that. So Peter Moon has been involved with this type of opening of consciousness for at least 15, 20 years, and I admire him very much. And so he was the one who took responsibility for getting this to get, in other words, I'm telling something right now. Anybody who wants to get a hold of all this material and read it, you can still get it. And it's outrageous that more of us don't, but people are catching on. And I'm certainly going to do everything I can. I am doing everything I can.
And
Yeah.
what's interesting, Barbara, by the way, as soon as I read your part about that research,
Hmm.
but I think part of what's so critical and probably why it's being kept secret when it should be public is it also revises our whole understanding of history. I mean, you and I understand that there were these highly advanced ancient cultures in the past. We haven't been on some kind of linear progression across time. So, part of what I think needs to be more public that we need to reclaim is in our history as humanity on this planet, we have lived at very advanced levels.
Oh, that's right.
And the other piece of it that so ties in with your book is that as we're moving into the Aquarian age, it is about reclaiming what we're capable of with our consciousness. It's not about third dimensional technology, it's about
Right.
consciousness.
That's right. It's totally about consciousness. And then back to how you so nicely described the polarity issue, the opposite to Age of Aquarius, which is what we're in the early stages of it now for sure. I think personally for me, I think the Age of Aquarius really opened in 1998, but we're really there. Okay. The opposite age is the Age of Leo. And you and I both know what happened during the Age of Leo, right? A gigantic cataclysm. And that's the data bank that I offered in Awakening the Planetary Mind. And that data bank originally came to me from my grandfather, who was a Cherokee record keeper. So my tribal people and family Cherokee people had that information about that cataclysm, as do many, many other
As
cultures.
do the Hopis and many others.
Right. It's there. So here's the thing that they probably would like most intensely to hide. This goes back to 50,000 years ago. Now, if you get into Carl Kalaman's research, you're into the very midpoint of what's called I'm trying to remember what he calls that age. It's the Middle Age there, but it's for us, it's the Paleolithic era, which is about 100,000 years old. So the time acceleration of the Paleolithic era peaked in 50,000 BC, 50,000 years ago. Then, for some mysterious reason, whoever these people were, they left or they were exterminated. We don't have any idea. What we do know about these people is they were between 9 and 15 feet tall. So, and the reason we know that is the archaeological site shows that the people who used the equipment were 9 to 15 feet tall. Now, this is the kind of thing nobody wants you to know about this stuff. People just figure if they can just keep you dumb and you're going to miss the point. But this is like awesome.
It's just mind-blowing. I
Yeah.
mean,
And they probably were a bunch of Syrians. That's my theory, because one of the tunnels goes to Giza, and the Syrians were the definite teachers of the pharaonic Egyptian culture, and even earlier. The Egyptian culture, of course, goes way back further than most people realize. And a researcher named Edward Malkowski published a couple of books on the most advanced levels of Egyptian technology, and he dated them at 49,000 BC. So, see, there's some kind of hold, there's some kind of political hold on the Syrian technology, the Syrian cultures. Because look at how they tried to hide the truth about ancient Egypt. But they're not getting away with it very well these days. Basically, everybody knows.
It's interesting too, speaking of the Syrians, that the Dogon tribe talks about their being taught by the Syrians and having thousands of years of history of interaction with them. So it just shows how in different parts of the world they were interacting and teaching us their
See, that
technology.
was another cover-up, another embarrassing cover-up. The author of The Sirius Mystery, Robert Temple is a very prominent esoteric writer. And he went in and examined the work of a group of anthropologists who studied the Dogon in the 1920s. And this group of anthropologists in the 1920s basically wrote a book about how the Dogon culture understood the Sirius star system, Sirius A, Sirius B, and Sirius C. And it was kind of embarrassing. Robert Temple comes along in 1977 and he says, "Oh, well, how come these anthropologists discovered that they knew about how the Sirius star system functions when astronomers didn't figure it out until about 1950 or 60, right?" Well, then that leads into some stuff that you and I love talking about, which is the issue of the Sirius star system, the main star of Sirius being a binary star to our sun. And I know that's true. And I've always known that was true, as a matter of fact. And we'll see what it takes to get people to figure that one out. It looks like the Dogon of Mali and Africa, a bunch of really primitive, stupid people. Looks like maybe they figured it out. Right?
And certainly the ancient Egyptians knew. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, Barbara, but a woman, Lenny, I'm not going to pronounce her last name properly, Lenny Radak, has brought out a book about how all of the ancient temples in Malta, which she thinks are far more ancient than what traditional archaeology would say, all of them are oriented towards Sirius.
Oh, really? You're gonna have to email that reference to me. We have the best time. We're never going to run out of reading material because as soon as you run out, I find something. And our time is winding up. I know we both have a few things we have to do, but I just would like to also say that you turned me on to the book, The Yuga Shift, by, let's see, its name. It's a
Bibhu
hard one.
Dev Misra.
Bibhu Dev
Misra.
Misra, an Indian writer. And this is, I would say, it came out in the end of November, like last year, 2023, I think. And I would say that this book will tell you more about what's really going on with cataclysms on this planet than almost anything I've ever read.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally
And
agree.
it's a hard read. because Bibhu, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay. Bibhu definitely looks at it differently than I do. And this is interesting from the point of view of Western consciousness and Eastern consciousness, because in the Eastern consciousness, we have a tradition called cataclysmos and ectopyrosis, which is a whole tradition of when the planet goes through cataclysmic cycles. And I'm in agreement with them, but I'm not necessarily in agreement that it's going to happen this time. I think we are in our ascension, our curve in the spiral beyond being caught in the perennial circle of cataclysms every 12, 13,000 years. And I believe that. And it's hard to believe it. When you look around yourself and when you see what's happening, it's hard to believe we have any chance to survive. But I think we're going to.
And one more comment about that, Barbara, because I think that is so important. And I look forward to talking to Bibhu next week.
Mhm.
And to me, that part of why his work is so important is he's really talking about this historical cycle that we've been in. And his deep dive into the Sanskrit text is amazing.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that we're at this critical choice point now. And
Mhm.
so we can make that choice as to what path we want to be on. Do we want to step off that wheel of
Mhm.
that historical cycle and move into higher consciousness, which your book is guiding us into? Or do we want to stay locked into third dimensional reality? And one
Mhm.
of your quotes in the book that I thought was so powerful is you say two operative worlds exist right now in the third dimension, as if two movies were running simultaneously. What each individual contributes is of cosmic significance. And then you talk about how the two worlds are the path of ascension or those who are headed towards apocalypse.
Mhm.
So it so ties in with what you just said, that this is that choice point that we each have to take responsibility for our consciousness. Also, Barbara, I believe these cataclysmic crises have happened at these periodic times in our human history because we've gotten so out of balance. And it's part of why we've been quarantined and not allowed to be galactic citizens because we've been so out of balance and so destructive. So
Mhm.
this is the time for us as humanity to wake up,
That's right.
to open up our consciousness to these nine dimensions and remember who we are and what we're capable of,
Mhm.
rather than being locked into this third dimensional illusion.
And we close it off by saying, as soon as a critical number, or maybe a majority or whatever, open nine dimensions of consciousness, and as soon as those people have their vote, the power is going to go back to the people.
And it will change the collective consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah, the collective consciousness has to happen in order for that to happen. And if you watch closely, I kind of think there's quite a few people in power who are really beginning to wonder whether it's even worth it.
Mm.
People who get a whole lot of money, they're not necessarily that happy. And so I'll leave it at that. I think something much greater and much more fulfilling is coming back to us.
And just to close, as you said, when we open our hearts, we open the path to that higher consciousness.
So,
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much for
thank
being
you
in
for
this
having me
conversation.
again, and blessings.
And blessings and love to all of you listening.
Yeah.